My name is Vera Collins, and I'm 28 years old. 2 weeks ago, my phone lit up with a Portland, Oregon area code while I was sitting at my kitchen table in Hartford, Connecticut. It was my biological mother, Sandra, a woman who hadn't breathed a word to me in 13 years. She didn't call to ask if I was alive, and she didn't call to say she was sorry. She called to order me to fly across the country for my Uncle Harold's will reading because her family's business was drowning in debt. What she didn't know was that a legal debt trap signed 13 years ago was about to snap shut on her fingers. She expected to walk out with millions, but she ended up begging on her knees for mercy in a corporate hallway. Welcome back to her Dignity Stories, where ordinary women set quiet boundaries that change everything, and self-worth always gets the last word. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with my journey. Please leave your city, state, or country in the comments down below. Now, grab yourself a warm cup of coffee, leave the noise of the world behind, and listen to my story very carefully. Let's go back to that Tuesday morning phone call. I was reviewing a financial risk assessment on my laptop when the screen buzzed. I picked up on the third ring, thinking it was a client. "Vera, it's your mother," the voice said. Cold and flat, with no hesitation. My stomach dropped instantly, that old childhood reflex hitting me like a physical blow. "Your Uncle Harold passed away last week," she continued without a trace of grief. "The attorneys at the Columbia Center are opening his estate files this Friday at 2 p.m. You need to be there because family matters are handled by family." I stared out my window at the gray Hartford rain, my knuckles whitening around the phone. "Family?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "You threw my life into 2 black garbage bags on a freezing night when I was 15. Listen here, Vera," she snapped, her tone dripping with that familiar, ugly authority. "Your sister Tiffany needs this house, and we are not letting your old grudges ruin our future." The line went dead, leaving me in the silence of my apartment. 13 years of weaponized silence, broken only because a cash-strapped predator smelled an inheritance. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a thick manila folder, and looked at the certified deed from 2013. The numbers on the papers were clear, and numbers do not negotiate. My mother thought she was setting a stage for her victory. She had no idea she had just walked straight into my trap. That phone call dragged me straight back to the summer of 2013 in Southeast Portland. I was 15, working my fingers to the bone, studying by a dim desk lamp every night. The hard work paid off when a thick white envelope arrived from Oregon State University. I won a full-ride STEM summer scholarship worth exactly $4,200. For 24 hours, I felt like I finally mattered in that house. Then, my mother found out. She didn't congratulate me. She just stared at the paper like it was a bill. My sister Tiffany wanted to attend a private art school in California that cost thousands. We didn't have that kind of money on a mechanic's salary. So, my mother hatched a plan in her head. She Len Lut forged my signature on the decline form and mailed it back to OSU. I found out when the university called to ask why I gave up my spot. My mother told me I was going to work at the local auto body shop instead. I was supposed to hand over every paycheck to fund Tiffany's California tuition. The betrayal burned so hot in my chest I could barely breathe. "No," I said, the word slipping out before I could stop it. The entire kitchen went dead silent. I looked at my father, Kenneth, desperate for him to stand up for me just this once. He didn't move an inch. He just cleared his throat, turned his back, and stared out the window to keep the peace. He chose his own comfort over his 15-year-old daughter. Then, my mother moved fast. She marched into my room, ripped my clothes off the hangers, and grabbed my high school textbooks. She stuffed everything into 2 heavy black garbage bags. The plastic tore slightly at the top, exposing my favorite gray hoodie. She dragged the bags downstairs and threw them onto the front porch. "If you can't sacrifice for this family, you don't belong here," she barked. She slammed the front door shut, and the deadbolt clicked final. It was pouring down rain. A typical brutal Pacific Northwest storm. I sat on those trash bags in the dark for 4 straight hours, shivering and completely broken. I watched the windows of my own home go dark one by one. Nobody came out with a blanket, and nobody called my name. But just when I thought the dark would swallow me whole, a pair of headlights pulled into the driveway. Those headlights belonged to my Uncle Harold's gray Honda Civic. He had driven 3 hours straight from Seattle through the pouring rain just to get to me. He shut off the engine, stepped out into the storm, and didn't say a word at first. He just walked up the porch steps, looked at my soaked jacket, and pulled me into a hug. I buried my face in his flannel shirt, smelling of coffee and old cedar wood. "From now on, you have a real home, kiddo," he whispered into my hair. He loaded my 2 soggy garbage bags into his trunk and we drove north toward Seattle. His house in the Ballard neighborhood wasn't big, but it felt like a fortress to me. For the first time in my life, I had a bedroom that was entirely mine. Uncle Harold didn't just give me a roof. He invested his whole heart in my future. I threw myself into my books, graduating from high school with a 4.0 GPA. I worked 20 hours a week at a local coffee shop to pay for my gas and groceries. Uncle Harold helped me with tuition at the University of Washington. And I didn't waste a dime. I studied finance, sitting at his kitchen table until midnight reviewing spreadsheets. During those 4 grueling years, my biological parents completely erased me. They never called my cell phone, and they never sent a single Christmas card. But in the spring of 2015, my sophomore year, my mother suddenly called Uncle Harold's phone. I was standing right next to him in the kitchen when he picked up and put it on speaker. "Harold, Richard lost his job at the auto shop." Her voice whined through the line. "We need $5,000 immediately to cover the mortgage, and you have plenty to spare." Uncle Harold's jaw went completely tight, his grip whitening around his coffee mug. "How is Vera doing in college, Sandra?" Harold asked, his voice sharp as steel. "Is she eating enough? Is she passing her exams?" There was a long, ugly silence on the other end of the phone. "Vera is an adult. She can figure her own life out." My mother snapped carelessly. "Now, are you going to wire us the money or not?" Uncle Harold didn't raise his voice. He just said, "No," and hung up the phone. They didn't want me. They just wanted his cash. That phone call shattered the very last piece of hope I had left for my parents. I passed my CPA exam on the first try and landed an analyst job in Hartford, a month after that call. On my 18th birthday, Uncle Harold told me to get into his car. He drove me downtown to a small legal office on Asylum Avenue. He set a thick stack of papers in front of me on the conference table. "Sign these. Vera," he said, his eyes filled with absolute determination. "I'm setting up an irrevocable trust for the house and my investments. This will protect you from those bloodsuckers when I'm gone, no matter what they try to sign." I signed my name on the lines, not knowing those documents would save my life years later. With those papers locked in a legal safe, I packed my bags for Connecticut to start my career. Moving to Hartford, Connecticut was the cleanest break I could have ever asked for. I plunged myself straight into the financial world, working 60 hours a week as a risk analyst. Numbers became my shield, my boundary, and my absolute truth. I quickly learned that while people spin emotional lies to get what they want, a balance sheet never lies. Within 3 years, I was promoted to financial risk manager, overseeing a multi-million-dollar portfolio. I bought my own 2-bedroom apartment near Bushnell Park, paying the mortgage completely on my own. Nobody handed me a dime, and that made every single square foot feel like a victory. My life was quiet, independent, and completely free of the Collins family drama. But when you start making waves in the business world, the predators always notice. The Hartford Business Journal ran a small profile feature on me, labeling me a top young analyst to watch. Suddenly, my blocked email spam folder started filling up with loopy cursive fonts from Oregon. My mother sent an email with the subject line, "Thinking of you, sweetheart." Out of nowhere. She wrote paragraphs about how proud she always knew I'd make her, completely forgetting the garbage bags. 2 days later, Tiffany emailed me a link to a luxury apartment registry in Seattle, asking for a family loan. They didn't offer a single apology, and they didn't ask if I was happy. They just saw my job title, counted the zeros on paper, and expected a payout. I didn't reply. I didn't cry, and I didn't waste a second of my time. I hit the delete button on every single message, scrubbing their digital footprints from my screen. Numbers do not negotiate with predators, and neither do I. However, my risk management job gave me access to public credit monitoring registries across the country. In October, an automated alert popped up on my desktop screen regarding Collins Mechanics LLC. Our funds auditing database flagged their business license for extreme debt delinquency. I opened the financial audit report and did the math line by line. The family business was drowning under a massive $300,000 high-interest debt load. Tiffany had bankrupted my parents' garage by draining their accounts for fraudulent art investments online. They were facing total foreclosure, with a balloon payment due in less than 2 months. Then, my screen showed a second public title inquiry on Uncle Harold's property in Ballard. My mother was Rauria trying to find a realtor to list his house behind his back. They were actively scouting his real estate asset, trying to stake a claim to cover Tiffany's massive losses. They thought his property was an open bank account waiting for their signature. They had no idea Uncle Harold had already transferred the clean deed to an irrevocable trust. That audit report was the exact reason I wasn't surprised when my phone rang 2 weeks later. The Friday of the will reading arrived with a heavy, gray drizzle over downtown Seattle. I took the elevator up to the 47th floor of the Columbia Center. Stepping into the sleek glass offices of Morrison & Associates, rain streaked the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the Olympic Mountains into blurry shadows. I sat at the polished walnut conference table, adjusting my navy blazer and checking my watch. At exactly 2:03 p.m., the glass doors swung open, and the Collins family marched in like they owned the place. My mother, Sandra, led the way, draped in a brand new black designer dress and a pearl necklace. She was drowning in bankruptcy debt, but she still spent money on wardrobe to maintain appearances. My father followed in a tight gray suit, shuffling his feet and avoiding eye contact with the room. Tiffany brought up the rear, checking her phone every 10 seconds with an anxious, twitchy look. They were flanked by Victor Harrington, a tall, silver-haired attorney carrying an expensive leather briefcase. Sandra's eyes scanned the room until she spotted me sitting calmly at the center of the table. She immediately put on a theatrical mask of sorrow, her eyes turning watery on command. Chitro-Tren walked straight toward me, opening her arms for a forced, heavy-scented hug. "Oh, Vera, sweetheart, I'm so glad you're here," she said loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I know you've always been a good girl at heart, and our family is going to get through this crisis together." I felt my jaw set, but I didn't let my expression change at all. I cold-bloodedly stood up and pushed her hands down, stepping back out of her reach. "Do not touch me, Sandra, and do not call me your daughter," I said, my voice quiet but cutting like surgical steel. Her fake smile fractured instantly, a flash of pure anger twisting her features before she recovered. Harrington stepped in front of her, unzipping his briefcase and pulling out a crisp legal document. He slid it across the table directly toward Margaret Morrison with a smug smile. "Before we begin the reading, we are filing a formal estate challenge on behalf of Richard and Sandra Collins." I leaned back in my leather chair, watching his pen move with absolute detachment. On what grounds? Mr. Harrington? Morrison asked, looking over her reading glasses. Undue influence and estate manipulation, Harrington declared, raising his voice for maximum dramatic effect. We are alleging that Vera Collins systematically isolated her sick uncle during his final months of illness. She used psychological leverage to cut off his biological brother and rewrite his estate plan for her own profit. Tiffany nodded right on cue, dabbing her dry eyes with a monogrammed tissue. They actually believed this desperate paperwork attack would freeze the assets and force me to buy them off. They thought my 13 years of silence meant I was a soft target who would panic under pressure. They had no idea that their arrogant little legal filing had just triggered the deadliest trap in my folder. Harrington's smug challenge hung in the humid office air as the will reading officially began. He stood at the head of the table, tapping his gold pen against his legal pad. According to the state intestacy rules, my clients are the sole immediate heirs, Harrington argued confidently. Richard Collins is the only blood brother of the deceased. Therefore, he is legally entitled to at least 50% of this $23 million estate. My mother leaned back, her pearl necklace catching the fluorescent light as she smirked at me. She looked across the table at the representatives from Seattle Children's Hospital and Habitat for Humanity. This girl sitting here is an ungrateful child, Sandra announced loudly to the charities. She abandoned our family when she was 15 years old, packing her things and running away in the middle of the night. She has zero right to represent our family name or inherit my brother-in-law's hard work. My father kept his eyes glued to the floor, coughing into his hand to hide his hen gnat. Tiffany crossed her legs, looking at me like I was already defeated. The charity executives looked uncomfortable, shifting in their leather chairs. They didn't sign up for a toxic family showdown. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on my portfolio, keeping my breathing slow and even. I let her build her wall of lies higher and higher. If you were sitting in my shoes right now, watching your own mother drag your name through the mud for cash, what would you do? Would you scream back at her in pure rage? Or would you remain silent and let the paperwork do the talking? Type rage or silence in the comments right now, because I need to know how you'd handle this betrayal. Now, let me show you what happened next. Margaret Morrison didn't blink, and she didn't raise her voice. She just smiled a small, professional smile and opened her archive folder. Mr. Harrington, your intestacy argument requires a legal familial relationship, Morrison said smoothly. But your clients severed that relationship 13 years ago. Shi Lung Lang pulled out a yellowed document with an official blue state seal. This is the voluntary relinquishment of parental rights and transfer of guardianship, dated July 15th, 2013. It bears the notarized signatures of both Richard and Sandra Collins, filed under King County Family Court Case number 2013, GH 5847. Morrison slid the certified copies across the table. Sandra's fake sorrow vanished instantly, her eyes widening as she stared at the red wax notary stamp. They didn't just kick Vera out, Morrison continued, her voice cutting through the silence. They legally signed her away, terminating every parental right and financial connection to her name. Harrington froze mid-sentence, his silver head snapping down to read the fine print. The ice under their expensive designer shoes was officially starting to crack. The revelation of my signed guardianship papers threw the whole room into a freezing silence. Harrington stared at the blue court seal, his confident posture collapsing in his leather chair. My mother's hands began to shake against her designer purse, her red cheeks suddenly turning a pasty white. Before they could recover, Margaret Morrison adjusted her glasses and turned to page 12 of the document. Let's proceed to Article 7, the designation of sole beneficiary, Morrison said, her voice echoing off the glass walls. I hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including the Ballard commercial properties, all liquid assets, and voting rights, to my legally adopted daughter, Vera Collins. The words hit the conference table like a physical explosion. Sandra shot to her feet so fast her pearl necklace rattled against her throat. Every ounce of blood drained completely from her face. "Adopted daughter?" Sandra shrieked, her voice cracking all the way to the ceiling. "This is insane. Harold was my brother-in-law, not her father. Vera is my daughter. She is his niece. And this Dichuk is an absolute fake." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger straight at my face. My father, Richard, stood up beside her, his breath coming out in ragged, hoarse gasps. Tiffany just stared at me, her mouth hanging wide open in pure, unadulterated shock. They were looking at $23 million vanishing from their grasp in real time. Margaret Morrison didn't look up from her paperwork, and she didn't lose her calm precision. She simply tapped a second certified folder on the table. "Mr. Harold Collins formally adopted Vera Collins on September 12, 2015, Morrison stated with clinical certainty. The adoption was finalized in King County Family Court under file number 2015 AD 3291. Since you legally relinquished your parental rights in 2013, no additional consent from you was required by the state." Tiffany turned her head slowly toward Sandra, her eyes wide with total disbelief. "So, you're saying she isn't even my sister on paper anymore?" Tiffany whispered, her voice brittle. I looked directly into my mother's wild eyes, my hands resting flat on the mahogany table. "Not legally. Tiffany," I said, my voice carrying the flat, steady tone of a risk analyst. "Sandra and Richard ceased to be my parents exactly 11 years ago when they signed me away for their own comfort. Uncle Harold didn't steal a daughter. He just picked up what you threw onto a wet porch in 2 garbage bags." Harrington didn't say a word, his pen dropping onto his legal pad with a dull click. He knew the inheritance battle was legally dead, and his client's case had just imploded. Sandra collapsed back into her chair, her hands gripping her pearls as her entire world unraveled. But my Uncle Harold's estate layout wasn't just designed to leave me his real estate portfolio. He knew they would come running with lawsuits the second the numbers changed, and he had built one final trap to make them pay. The adoption papers completely crushed my mother's legal strategy, but the real nightmare for her was just beginning. Margaret Morrison pulled one final document from the bottom of her leather folder. "We are now entering the addendum to the estate files," Morrison announced, her voice flat and cold. She slid a paper titled Bridge Loan Promissory Note and Release Agreement, dated July 2013, across the table. My mother stared at the document, her mouth opening and closing as she recognized her own blue ink signature. Back in 2013, my parents' auto body shop was drowning in debt and facing immediate foreclosure. They desperately needed cash, and Uncle Harold offered them a lifeline. He agreed to give them a $250,000 bridge loan to save their mechanical garage from liquidation. But that loan came with a very strict, non-negotiable legal condition. Sandra and Richard had to sign the voluntary relinquishment of parental rights over me without causing any ruffles. They traded their 15-year-old daughter to an uncle for a $250,000 check. My father let out a low, pathetic groan, buried his head in his rough mechanic's hands, and began to tremble. That loan was structured with a 0% interest rate. "Mr. Harrington," Morrison continued, turning to the lawyer. "However, look at page 3, subsection B, regarding the penalty escalation clause. The clause explicitly stated that the 0% rate would remain valid unless the Collins family attempted to contest Harold's estate or quash Vera's inheritance. By filing that formal estate challenge and fraud claim this morning, your clients have triggered the penalty clause. The 0% interest loan instantly converted into a predatory default rate, compounded monthly back to 2013. Your original debt of $250,000 is now a legal judgment of exactly $550,000. And according to the terms, the entire $550,000 balance must be wire transferred to the estate within 14 business days. Failure to pay will result in an immediate asset liquidation order on your Portland auto shop and your residential home. Sandra froze, her fingers clawing at her pearl necklace until the string almost snapped. The exact weapon they built to attack my inheritance had boomeranged right back to destroy their own financial existence. Tiffany spun around to face our mother, her eyes wide with total panic. "Mom, you said this lawyer was going to freeze the funds. You didn't say we owed money," Tiffany shrieked. Harrington looked down at his legal pad, slammed his briefcase shut, and stood up without looking at his clients. "My firm is withdrawing from this case effective immediately due to an unresolvable conflict of interest," he said stiffly. He walked out of the conference room, his leather soles squeaking against the marble floor before the door clicked shut. My mother sat stranded at the end of the table, stripped of her attorney, her greed, and her fake dignity. The balance sheet had done its job, and the numbers were about to crush the predators once and for all. The heavy glass doors of the conference room clicked shut, leaving the hallway utterly silent. The charity representatives and the junior associates slipped away through the side exits. Avoiding our eyes, my biological parents and Tiffany stood frozen on the polished marble floor of the Columbia Center. Without their expensive lawyer, they looked stripped of their arrogant masks, suddenly small and desperate. The high-altitude wind rattled the massive glass panes 47 stories above downtown Seattle. Sandra took 2 shaky steps toward me, her knuckles gripping her purse strap until her cheap knuckles turned white. Then, her knees buckled completely. She dropped straight onto the cold tile, her lavender-scented perfume choking the small space between us. Real tears finally smeared her thick mascara, running down into the deep lines around her mouth. "Vera, sweetheart, please," she sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of my trousers. "We are still blood. You can't let this title company ruin your own father and me. We made mistakes. But family doesn't throw family into the street over a piece of paper." I looked down at her, my hands flat in my coat pockets, my chest feeling entirely empty. Behind her, Tiffany stood against the wall, her designer sunglasses in her hand, her chin tucked into her chest in total, burning humiliation. The golden child who had drained my parents' bank accounts for internet scams couldn't even meet my gaze. Then, my father, Richard, cleared his throat. His shoulders were hunched under his oversized jacket, his hands shaking as he pulled them out of his pockets. He looked at me with red, watery eyes, and for the first time in 13 years, he actually spoke directly to me. "I am so sorry, Vera," he whispered, his voice cracking wide open. "I was a coward. I stood by and watched your mother dump your life on that porch because I wanted a quiet house. I should have driven to Seattle. I should have been a real father to you." I met his trembling gaze evenly, my voice remaining conversational and deadly calm. "Your apology comes exactly 13 years too late to save my childhood. Dad," I said, "you never called when I was sleeping on a pull-out couch or working dawn shifts at the coffee shop. You didn't care when I was just a ghost to this family. This regret didn't strike your conscience when you signed me away for a check in 2013. It only surfaced right now because you are staring down a liquidation order from an estate attorney." I stepped around my mother's outstretched hands, my heels clicking sharp against the stone floor. I pushed the elevator button, watching the digital floor numbers count up toward 47. They had built a life on transactional love, and the bill had finally come due. I stepped into the empty elevator cab and turned around to face them one last time. The doors began to slide together, cutting off the view of my mother still weeping on her knees. The litigation was settled, the balance sheet was balanced, and it was time for me to go home to Hartford. Leaving the legal wreckage of the Collins family in Seattle, allowed me to finally breathe the clean, crisp air of my own life again. I flew back to Hartford, Connecticut, and went straight to my office downtown to finalize the paperwork. As the sole trustee of my uncle's estate, my first official act was signing the funding mandate for a new nonprofit organization. I established the Vera Collins STEM Foundation, a fully endowed scholarship fund named after the man who saved my life. The fund provides full housing, tuition, and living stipends for high school kids who have been dumped on porches by their own parents. Meanwhile, back in Portland, the 14-day clock ran out on the default judgment. Sandra and Richard couldn't find a single bank to refinance their debt, and no lawyer would take their case. They were forced to put their residential house and the auto body shop on the public auction block to pay the $550,000 judgment. They lost everything Tiffany had bankrupted, moving into a cramped, 2-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of town. 6 months later, a wrinkled envelope with a Portland postmark arrived in my Hartford mailbox. It was a handwritten letter from my sister, Tiffany, scribbled on plain notebook paper. She didn't ask for a single dollar, and she didn't beg for an introduction to my financial network. She simply confessed that she had always been jealous of my focus, my grit, and my scholarship years ago. She admitted that she had hidden behind our mother's toxic favoritism because she was terrified of failing on her own. "We got exactly what we deserved, Vera," she wrote at the bottom of the 3rd page. I didn't pick up the phone, and I chose to leave her message completely unanswered. I just folded the paper, slipped it into my kitchen junk drawer, and felt a massive weight lift from my chest. It's a cold Tuesday night in December now, and the first winter bow is throwing heavy snow against my apartment window. I'm sitting at my clean kitchen table, enjoying a quiet dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables. I pour myself a slow glass of red wine, look out at the Hartford streetlights, and let the peace settle into my bones. If you are listening to this right now, and you are an older adult being drained dry by greedy children or toxic relatives, hear me clearly. You do not owe your life savings, your peace of mind, or your hard-earned dignity to people who only treat you like a business transaction. Setting hard boundaries isn't revenge, and it isn't drama. It is basic survival. If they didn't choose to love you when it mattered, they do not deserve a seat at your table today. If my journey reminded you of your own worth, please check out the other family drama stories linked on my channel right now. I've posted several videos about setting quiet boundaries and overcoming family betrayal that I know will help you heal. Make sure you are subscribed with notifications turned on. Because in my next video, I am uncovering a massive financial secret. I will share the exact story of a grandmother who outsmarted her ungrateful children by hiding her assets in plain sight. You won't want to miss that showdown. So stay tuned, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.